All right, welcome to week 2. We're going to talk about chords, how to learn chords, how to memorize chords, and how to play chord progressions. So the first thing is just that same concept with the walking exercises. You're putting your fingers just behind the fret there, your hand is staying in this position. And remember, this is the 6th string and this is the 1st string, so 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So if you see the box that is in the in the document there, there's a little box, and when we're looking at that box, we're looking at those chord charts. The stuff in that box to the left is the 6th string. So in other words, the farthest left material on that little chord box, as we call them, is the 6th string, the lowest string, and then the highest is the 1st string. So again, that's just the material that is over to the left on the graph, and then your 1st string is over to the right. And then what chord boxes typically show is they show the first 4 frets. They will indicate if that fret is to be moved. But for the beginning open chords, they're going to be just in these first 4 frets. So if you take a look at the E minor chord, and you can use the chord app, you can use the documents I have in here, and there's a million other apps online to do this. But if you look at the chord app, you look at the E minor chord there, you have to say to yourself, okay, where do I put my fingers down and what strings do I play? So in the chord app, or most apps, you'll see that you play every single string. So even if there's an open string in it, it'll just have a 0 as opposed to a finger, but it won't have an X. Typically an X means don't play. And then you're just looking through where you put down each of your fingers. So for the E minor chord, you're going to put your 2nd finger on the 2nd fret of the 5th string. So again, that's that battleship thing. And you put your finger there. And then you put your 3rd finger on the 4th fret, the 4th string, 2nd fret. And that is how you get an E minor chord. And then you will play all of the strings there. So you'll notice that there's opens, 0s on the other open strings, and that's an E minor chord. So it's very straightforward. You can use a pick or you can use your fingers for this stuff. I would say chords probably in the beginning it's easiest to do it with a pick, but you can try either way with the chords, using strumming chords with the back of your hand or with the pick. But chords, they'll sound like this. Okay, and so the chords that I think are most important to learn in the beginning is A minor, A7, C, C7. We can put that in parentheticals because that's a complicated one, along with F, D minor, D7, E7, E minor, F, and again that's the complicated one, and G7. If you can know those chords, you're off to the races with a lot of pop music, just a ton of material that you can get through. And they're just incredibly powerful shapes. And the other thing you want to learn is you want to be able to memorize these chords. You want to have each of the chords learned so you don't have to look at the book or the chart. These are something that you should just have completely. You should know your name and you should know what the chord looks like. So you can do that in a lot of different ways, just by good old-fashioned rote repetition is one way. Another way that I think is very effective over the years of teaching this stuff for students is thinking about the shape that the chord sort of emulates. So you can kind of think of like an A chord to me that can be like a line, right? Because if you'll see on the chart there, you're playing in a line, right? And you can think about these just sort of as almost visual devices in your head, and it helps to memorize them. Another thing to think about when you're doing these chords is the chords, an A major to an A minor to an A7 are going to be similar. So I recommend you work on one type of chord. So and then each of its qualities, as we call them, are the root of the chord is the A, but then the minor, the major, the 7th have different qualities. And I recommend you learn all those together in one group, because they're the most, that'll help you grasp the concept, I think, easier. And so anyways, so that's chords. And then quickly too, start to try to pay attention to what the minor, major, and seventh sound like. So if I play the major chord, it has this quality. It's an E major chord. If I play the minor chord, it has this quality. If I play the seventh chord, it has this quality. So each of those has different qualities. You can make up whatever you want. Some people call minor sad, major happy, dominant seventh chords, maybe silly. But you can decide what that is to you. It's sort of like labeling something red or blue. That's for our purposes, that's what those will be. And it's important to have a grasp on those, because the major, minor, and seventh chords will come up in pop music. And as you get more comfortable with it, you can start to hear what those chords will be. And when you're learning songs, it's much easier to know, oh, that's a minor chord, or this is in a major key. It makes for a better musical listening as well as performing thing. And then so if you can get those memorized, the next thing that we won't do it in the class, we do that first and then we take a little break with this, is strumming. So strumming chords is sort of the bread and butter of guitar, and strumming patterns, when you're strumming chords, you're essentially you're moving from one chord to another, and any of these chords will sound pretty good together. And you can just play around with this. I actually recommend you putting one chord in the middle of your I call it the box method. You put like an E major chord in the center, and then you can let the other chords sort of be adjacent to that. You can even write it out if you want to. But what I mean by that is if you put an E minor or E major chord rather here, then you go to A, then you go back to E, then you go to A minor, E major, G, because that gets your hand used to any possible permutation of those chords. So any possible permutation. You will have access to all of the shapes, all of the chords, and anything that you'll see in pop music, you'll be ready for it. So it's just something that will be in your system. And again, have them memorized. This could take a month. That's totally fine, totally normal. But have them memorized, because that's incredibly helpful. And again, make sure you can just do the walking exercise before you start the chords, because that will make it much, much easier. And then lastly, the other thing that we want to think about is strumming. So strumming chords and strumming patterns are crucial to guitar stuff. So if I take an E chord and I go, that's just, you can think about it however you want. You can just hear it down, 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 or whatever. You go down, down, up, down, up, down, or whatever. You can think down, ups. You could think just the pattern, but please play around with your own strumming patterns. So when you're playing a chord progression, if you want to go, that sounds very different from what I was just doing. And if I go, that sounds very different from what I was just doing. So the possibilities are endless. And basically you can hear them is probably the best way to do it, but you can also think about downstrokes and upstrokes. If you read music, you can write them out. I think that's actually overkill. Even if you read music, I wouldn't recommend doing that. But that's how chord progressions work, and that's how they sound cool with playing guitar. And you can also see too, when you're strumming those chords and we're changing chords, you'll see you can call these fingers pivot fingers you don't have to lift up. That's incredibly helpful. Just trying to not move fingers up can sometimes make a big difference in how easy it is for your left hand to move. And then one other great tip, probably my favorite tip that I'm going to give you here with these, is don't stop your right hand when you're playing chords. So what I mean by that is if you do this, everybody will notice that. You just put a big gap in the music. But if you're not quite ready with your hand and you do this, there was a gap there where I was playing open strings, but you can kind of get away with that, especially when you first start. So what I always say is don't stop your right hand. It will make everything much, much simpler as you're playing through this stuff. It makes just the whole thing a much more enjoyable experience for you. We're going to talk about pop songs, and I'll write this in the and how to read tablature and all that stuff. That will be mostly on paper. We'll have a version of that, but this is sort of where you can open up all the various. If you type in guitar tabs, there's all sorts of websites with songs that you want to play that have tablature or chord charts or something to where you can learn this. And hopefully if you already know the chords, it'll make it all that much easier because you don't have to reference the boxes they have there. You can memorize all this stuff. Okay, so that sort of wraps up chords and week 2. Now we're going to we'll talk about week 3, and we'll talk about hammer-on, some more exercise things, and we'll talk about some more of the progressions. And then also we'll talk about notes on the 5th and the 6th string and how power chords work, because those are another important part of pop music.